Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on approaching recovery after Hurricane Helene. And we're going to just give a couple of minutes for folks to get into the webinar, and then we'll get started. Looks like folks are still joining the webinar. We'll just give it another minute or two. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started now, and some others may join us. I'm Carl Silverstein with the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, and I appreciate everybody's interest in this topic, approaching recovery of the landscape after Hurricane Helene. This is the first of a few webinars we're going to be doing. This one's focused on private lands, and we are pleased that joining us on the panel today, we have some experts in the region on the topic of recovery for the forests and waterways. And I'd like to introduce Michael Cheek, who's a forester and director of the Mountain Division for the North Carolina Forest Service. And Liz Hillard is senior biologist with the Wildlands Network, Appalachian region. Lang Hornthal is co-director of EcoForesters, and Sarah Sheeran is stewardship director with the Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. So we're going to start with each panelist giving an overview of some of the topics they're encountering around recovery from Hurricane Helene, and then we will focus in on some specific questions that have been answered and give the panelists an opportunity to weigh in. We know that all of you have a lot of questions about your forests and the region generally recovering from the hurricane. So please put those in the Q&A and we'll try to reach everybody's questions. We only have an hour, so we know that there'll probably be more questions than we have an opportunity to answer in this time. But we will try to follow up with you or direct you to resources that can answer questions that maybe we're not able to get to in the webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce Michael and take it away.
All right, thank you, Carl. So like Carl said, my name is Michael Cheek. I'm the Mountain Division Director with the North Carolina Forest Service. So in general, that means I kind of manage and run our North Carolina Forest Service operations for the mountain region, which is basically I-77 West in North Carolina. So we have been fully engaged and involved both with recovery efforts as well as response efforts early on. From the agency standpoint, as many of y'all know, our main priority is working with private landowners in North Carolina. So both from a wildfire control scenario, but also as a forest management scenario, working with landowners to help manage their land, provide forest management plans, help with regeneration, invasive species control, different topics like that. So that's kind of where we're at right now. We've done most of the response efforts. We've still got a little bit of response going on here and there, but we're kind of in this transition period into the recovery effort, trying to make contact with our landowners that we've worked with landowners that reached out to us, working through some of the federal cost share programs that are out there to assist landowners with storm recovery efforts, but also trying to work with our agency partners to identify where the woodlands are damaged the most and where our wildfire concerns and fuel loading concerns are the heaviest, and how that's going to affect private homeowners and private landowners. That's what we're really kind of working towards in the future.
Thanks, Michael. Liz, how about from the perspective of wildlife movement and corridors and habitat?
Yeah, thanks, Carl, and hi, everyone out there. Yeah, so just a background, Wildlands Network is a conservation not-for-profit focused on wildlife habitat connectivity. So here in Western North Carolina, my work is often focused using data maps that identify important core wildlife habitat areas, and then their likely corridors that link them. And so we use those maps to guide our work, via engagement, research on the ground, looking into policy and funding for opportunities to promote wildlife habitat connectivity. Our initial work here, using these data maps overlaid with, what we know of destruction areas to help guide focus, identifying these habitats and how movements have potentially changed. But here early on, within this wildlife connectivity landscape, recently the impacts of roads on wildlife movement. So much of my work in the region, specifically in the Pigeon River Gorge, is focused on that. And based on some other states like Vermont, when Hurricane Irene went through that area in 2011, we know there's an opportunity where road infrastructure that's being replaced from bridges to culverts could potentially be more flood resilient, but better for our aquatic species and wildlife that use those important riparian areas as corridors. So trying to focus our map information and what we have to get the word out there, and currently are talking with our NCDOT partners.
Thanks, Liz. And Lang, with EcoForesters, you've helped SHC quite a bit already with recovery, so I imagine you're seeing a lot on the ground.
We are, Carl. Thanks for having me today. As Carl mentioned, EcoForesters is a professional forestry nonprofit based in Asheville, but working in the westernmost counties. And prior to Helene, we were addressing many of the challenges similar to what Michael and the North Carolina Forest Service are addressing: landowner engagement, getting them the resources needed to help them manage their forest. A lot of the challenges we're seeing now are those that have been exacerbated by the storm rather than created by the storm. These are challenges that have been going on for a while. I'm sad that it has taken a natural disaster to call attention to this, but for a forestry group, we're happy that everyone is talking about forestry and that everyone is much more engaged about these challenges around fire and invasive plants and just forest management in general. And we are also pleased to see community engagement, folks that are connecting with their neighbors. So often it's hard to help make that happen, because we find some of the biggest success stories are when neighbors are working together. So we are pleased that that has been a part of this whole process. Like everyone here, we've had to overcome capacity challenges because of the impacts to our staff and to our landowners that we work with. But we're fortunate that as a forestry group, we were able to pivot and help with groups like SAHC, but also individual landowners that had access issues and needed help with chainsaw work. And I couldn't be more proud of our staff and our board and how we've responded to something no one could have ever prepared for. And now it's looking at both short-term challenges that we're trying to address, but also how is this going to impact us into the future.
Thanks, Lang. And now, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm Sarah Sheeran, and I'm the Stewardship Director at SAHC. So I help oversee and steward our protected lands portfolio, which is about 65,000 acres in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. And we've been very busy the past couple of months, first ensuring that our conservation easement landowners, that we're connecting them to resources that they need to recover or begin to recover, and checking on them, and then spending quite a bit of our time assessing our own properties. So we hold well over 100 tracts on our own, and are facing the same challenges that others have mentioned here regarding access, where we have missing bridges and culverts are blown out, roads are being patched up. So access is a major issue for us, but we are beginning to think about repair. How can we build back better to withstand, you know, large scale events like Helene, as well as thinking about some of these longer term issues that Lang and others have already mentioned. You know, what does this mean for invasive species? What does this mean for fire? What does this mean for the, you know, the wildlife, the plants and animals that we protect, some of these really sensitive species, particularly in the higher elevations, spruce fir forests. So it's overwhelming what the amount of damage out there, but we are beginning to now move beyond the assessment phase and a little bit of triage and prioritizing what we need to address first.
Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah mentioned some of the questions that maybe we have more questions than answers at this point, but we have at SHC have been hearing a lot of questions that many of you probably on the webinar are curious about, and then others in the public. And so just diving in, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, but as best we can, how about that future wildfire risk and how the impact of all the additional down timber has on increasing, like in the summer wildfires, and if there are any measures that are being taken or can be taken to help mitigate that. And so anybody on the panel, I think, I mean, maybe starting with you, Michael.
Yeah,
but
I can start. So we did a survey or aerial survey, very coarse, soon after the hurricane went through to assess how much damage was out there. So rough numbers, 820,000 acres of forest land were damaged in some capacity from just single tree, group selection type damage in the woods to whole scale trees down all over the place. And about 79% of that 820,000 acres was on private landowners. And we did some rough calculation, and that turned in about $212 million in timber value lost. So there's a great hit on our timber / woodland resources. And with all that debris, tops, trees on the ground, that is a huge concern from the fuels management or fire control aspect, because quite honestly, you can't push through that stuff with dozers. You can't get through there with hand crews. So fires are going to get bigger. They are going to potentially be more destructive in the future if we don't do work where we can to improve conditions. So looking at our fuel management programs, looking at our Firewise programs, are there ways to work with landowners to reduce fuels around their homes as a priority, around streets in neighborhoods to be able to get folks in and out, and kind of aspects like that? For many of y'all that don't know, North Carolina actually leads the nation in the wildland urban interface category, which basically means number of homes in the woodland environment. So number of homes that are at risk of wildfire. North Carolina is the top state in the nation in that category. So we had tremendous risk to values before this storm hit. Now we have 820,000 acres of additional fuel loading and additional risk, which really is right along the Blue Ridge Escarpment and some of the northern counties in these high elevation, steep terrains, which makes it even a higher risk. So that is a huge concern for us as an agency, since that is one of our main driving responsibilities is wildfire control and the safety of the firefighters that are fighting those wildfires. So we as an agency are looking both within state legislation, but as well in federal legislation, trying to get more resources to assist us with those problems. Yeah.
thanks, Michael.
I'll jump in also, Carl. I mean, I think two overarching themes that you're going to hear a lot today. One is it depends. There's not an answer that is universal to every landowner and every forest stand. So a lot of it does depend on the direction your forest is facing. If it's in a predominantly drier or wetter area. The other thing is planning. Even prior to Helene, EcoForesters, one of our big things we push is for landowners to have a management plan, for them to understand what's in their forest, what has happened there, what is happening there now, and what they can do to achieve the outcomes that is most desirable to them. In this case, it's not having your forest burned down or you lose your house. So Michael mentioned some things that you can do to in consideration of your house, but there are also things that you can do to get wood closer to the ground. I mean, when you think about fuel in the forest, there's the option of removing it from the forest or promoting its decay. The nice thing about promoting its decay, and then again, if in the absence of a hurricane, if a tree falls in the forest, whether or not you hear it or not, we never know the answer if you're not there, but you leave it there. It helps create soils and rebuild soils, and it's excellent wildlife habitat, and it's nutrients that stay in your forest. So if you can get fuels to the ground so it doesn't act as a ladder into other trees and starts to promote the degrading of the wood, is something else that landowners are able to work on.
In that same vein, Lang, I just wanted to ask, because I do see a question here about salvage logging and if that's an option for landowners, and maybe either you or Michael might want to touch on that.
I can just, it depends. Salvage logging is an option. As you can imagine, it is a buyer's market right now. There is so much material on the ground. We have limited mills than what we have had historically. So with mill closures, whether it's the Canton paper mill or lumber mills, there are less people buying the materials. So that means the people that are buying have a lot of discretion in the stands they choose to harvest. And so it's going to depend on access is probably the number one issue. How easy is it to get to those materials? One interesting thing that we are looking at is if we manage a timber sale for someone, there's a lot of planning that goes in on the front end of how you expect that disturbance to happen. And there's a plan for how you would like the disturbance to happen, and then what you plan to do after the disturbance happens. Well, now we've had a lot of disturbance happen with no planning. So what we see is in regards to salvage logging is we have to consider access. Are you going to have to build a road to go in and get that? And if so, how is that going to impact your overall health of your forest? So there are lots of things to consider. It is a possibility, and for those that are interested, Michael can speak to this, but they have a list of timber buyers by county, and you can contact them to find out if your land is suitable for a salvage harvest. And hopefully you will also ask lots of questions about what the impacts to your land would be other than just removing the material.
Thank you, Lang. And in a minute, we want to shift to talking about impacts on wildlife and what private landowners can do to enhance wildlife habitat after Helene. But before we do, we did get a question where there was a request about how to get a forest management plan, who to contact, and ballpark of what it costs, how long it takes. So if y'all could maybe comment on that.
Okay, I'll start, and Lang, if you want to add a little bit to it, if I missed something. Generally speaking, there's two ways to get forest management plans here in North Carolina. So the state does provide that service at a minimum fee. And if you'll contact one of our county North Carolina Forest Service offices, and you can Google that online and find us pretty easily, and just talk to the county ranger in each county, and they'll start getting you signed up and put you on the list. And just depending on what the backlog is, it may be within weeks, it may be within a few months, depending on the county and how much interest they have going on in that county. The other option is private consulting forestries firms, much like Lang's firm with EcoForesters. We maintain a list of consulting forester firms throughout North Carolina and in the the western part of the state, and these consultants also provide forest management plans to landowners at a cost. But there are some programs coming down the line, and there are a couple actually still out there, cost share programs that can help defray that cost of a forest management plan for landowners.
Great, thank you. Liz, I guess the question is if you're able to use technology to kind of understand if wildlife movement patterns are changing as a result of Helene, or if it's just too early to tell.
Yeah, a little bit too early to tell, specifically in real time. On the ground, I could say that, you know, in our research that's been focused on the Interstate 40 Pigeon River Gorge area that's currently, you know, shut down, we do still have cameras monitoring wildlife activity out there. So we are curious to see with out there being traffic on the road currently, how that might influence wildlife movement. Again, a lot of that is just to get a general idea. We're going to be, you know, we're using our maps of these cores and corridors of habitat overlaid with what we know of some of these disturbed areas. But at the same time, you know, when considering wildlife habitat in our forests here, often say there's, you know, there's winners and losers. And so in generally, I'd say, you know, these forests that, you know, animals that are dependent on a closed canopy forest and those structures would be the losers in this situation, but potentially in the future with some of these larger overtop disturbances could provide, you know, vegetation on the ground and important structures for species. So what's going to be available for our forest dependent species is kind of up in the air. I will say a big focus of ours has been focused in Central Appalachia, where we actually work with foresters to promote kind of these overtop disturbances that, you know, kind of mimic that for cerulean warblers specifically that are, you know, conservation concern in Appalachia. So movement specifically, you know, unsure, but these guided patterns that we have through our research are going to be our focus. And, you know, really considering the, you know, wildlife habitat implications of post-Helene, both stream habitats and our forests.
Thanks. We've received a lot of questions about aquatic habitat and the scouring of stream banks, and if there's any way that stream banks can be restored with a vegetated buffer. Maybe it's too early to answer that question, but if any of y'all have any insights into anything the region may be able to do, or what the impacts on species like salamanders and wild fish are. I know people are wondering about that.
Yeah, I would just to follow up and let Lang or Michael jump in too. Yeah, really an unknown, and I think a concern for all of us, our aquatic species, and you know, how they've fared in all of this, and next steps for reestablishing these important habitats. But again, we're kind of in this early phase of trying to identify where those habitats have been lost, and restoration needs to be focused. I can say out in the Pigeon River Gorge, where the Pigeon River really rose and scoured those eastern bound lanes of Interstate 40, it has created quite the barrier to movement in an area near the double tunnel that has created a de facto land bridge over the interstate in an important area for connectivity. We have concerns now and are working with the DOT because to reestablish that stream bank that's been lost and then carved into the riverway, it's really created quite the barrier and an inability to kind of restabilize or even have an area there that isn't a large drop off. So yeah, again, the complexities and where these things are occurring, but really hoping in some of these areas it can be focused on reestablishing these habitats in some way.
And I
Yeah.
would oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I would add on to Liz that I think there's going to be substantial monitoring occurring over the next several years to really understand how wildlife has been impacted by this. We don't know. I mean, this is just a snapshot right now. It's going to take quite a bit of inventory to get a better sense of how this event maybe impacted wildlife movement. I know Liz is the expert here, but that's what we're seeing on SAHC owned properties, and we're gearing up to begin that monitoring as soon as we can.
And just from the stream bank restoration or planting side of things, I do know that North Carolina Division of Soil and Water is trying to really increase their stream restoration program. They've gotten a pretty good funding to help with that due to Helene impact. So more to come on that information, but there are several groups that are looking at stream restoration. But again, it just, like Lang said, it depends. So some areas it'll work well, in some areas it will not.
I
Thank
know
you.
there's a big concern too about non-native invasive species, and there are a ton of questions coming in, so I'm trying to address them as they come in. I know that EcoForesters and there are other programs, at least in Asheville, that have a robust invasive management program. But yes, I think the expectation is that as you have these newly opened areas, that they are now ripe for invasion from non-native invasive species, particularly plants. And some of our streams were already impacted by things like, Japanese knotweed, for instance. And so we always encourage our landowners to plant not only site-suitable species, but native species to help mitigate against the invasion of non-native invasives. And I think the sooner you do that, the better. There's a lot of bare stream bank out there. And I'm sure there are lots of programs and that we can connect some folks with those resources after this webinar. Lang, you may have more to say, but I just would acknowledge that it's a big concern for us too. We can't really do good forest management practices on our properties if we are first contending with non-native invasive plants.
No, that's right, Sarah. You and I have talked more about invasives even prior to Helene than we care to admit. It's a problem that has been here for a while and is only getting worse. And if again, getting back to the lack of planning that happened before this disturbance, if you weren't managing for invasives prior to the storm and they were present in areas that were disturbed, then you are ripe to have a really horrible reaction to the disturbance and the growth of invasive plants. It's really important, I think, that I mean, again, I'm glad we're talking about them, and how that translates into action is landowners and people just better educating themselves about what these invasives are, who are the bad actors. There's about probably 6 to 10 that we regularly deal with, and of that, a handful of them are the worst actors. It's knowing what they look like. It's knowing how they respond. Because that's the thing about invasive plants, which makes them so tricky, is they don't like to be controlled, and they have some mechanisms in place that will make it harder. For instance, tree of heaven, if you just cut one down, there's a natural response to throw up hundreds of sucker shoots to make the problem worse. But there are ways to control it slowly and almost trick it into not knowing that you're trying to kill it, so the response is not quite as aggressive. And so knowing how they respond, knowing what the treatment options are, and again, getting a plan. We like to talk about it in terms of not only an identification plan, knowing where invasives are on your property, but also a prioritization plan. It's unlikely that you are going to be able to just go to every spot on your forest in 1 year and deal with the invasive plants. It takes time, it takes resources. And so prioritize the areas that are most important to you and that you use the most, because it's going to make you happier when you see that you've gotten them under control in these areas. I think you think, oh, the worst area I need to start in. Well, that's not always the case. Sometimes you will just spend a lot of time and money trying to wrap your arms around that problem and not make a dent in it. And the last thing I would say is to educate yourself about herbicide and the judicial use and proper use of it. If it's something that you are not interested, for whatever reason, it's your personal choice not to use them, to be realistic about what it means to try to control invasives without using them. And I think understanding the scope of the problem so you can properly plan and get a control plan in order is an important first step.
Can I jump in really quick? I just want to answer a few of the questions. I was trying to answer them in the Q&A and I might have deleted some, so apologies. There was a question about monitoring CSX as far as the work that they're doing in some of our rivers. I think that was in the news actually recently. I would guide you to look at the Mountain Express that had some information about that. North Carolina Native Plant Society has some great resources on native species that you can plant. So Janice, I'm responding directly to you. And then Michael, could you briefly just say again, the funding program through the state through stream bank restoration? I was thinking the North Carolina Land and Water Fund, but I think you were referring to state soil and water.
Yes, North Carolina Division of Soil and Water that works with local soil and water conservation districts. They're working on getting a large pot to focus on stream restoration.
And in the chat, I threw a link to a management guide for invasive plants in southern forests. It's going to include invasives that might not be as prevalent here, but it's a good resource. And if I can stumble upon others during this, I'll throw them in the chat too.
And it may be that Emma will have to put in the chat for the webinar guests the items that you're putting in the chat. So we can definitely do that. Just kind of following up with answering questions that are appearing in the Q&A. Another question was related to the trying to get funding to help landowners with cutting the snags to bring them down to the forest floor to mitigate fire risk, whether there's any funding programs that offer help for that, or whether that's really the landowners on their own.
Okay, so there actually is a new program. Well, it's not new. It's a program that's been around, but was authorized for this area due to the emergency. EFRP, Emergency Forest Restoration Program. And this is run through your local farm service agency. So the FSA office and the NRCS office that works for your county. Sometimes they work for multiple counties. So this program does have some debris removal programs in there or cost share practices for getting debris out of the woods, helping with that cost, and also management of that debris. So this is a new program. They've got a lot of different options there, and both with invasive species control as well as forest planning, replanting, stuff like that. Crop tree release, but this was authorized for this area due to Helene, and there's a good bit of funds in there for landowners. So that'll be through your local farm service agency.
And I can add a little bit to that. You know, the interesting thing about that funding is it is the Farm Service Agency is a very ag central agency, and really forestry falls under agriculture, so it all goes together. But the funding, as we understand it, and it's interesting because it's predominantly this type of funding has been in more hurricane prone areas, and it's more southern and Gulf Coast areas where they're pine plantations, and the funding and challenges were much different than what we're seeing here. So what we are hearing is that not only is this still very fluid in terms of what will be funded and who will be eligible for funding, we are hearing that if you are if your property has agriculture on it and you are managing your land for agriculture, then you would be able to access these funds. If it's from forestry, timber production, or someone who has a management plan that identifies timber goals in there are going to be prioritized. And so that's going to probably mean you are going to have a management plan in order to access some of these funding funds. As Michael said, I encourage you to reach out to your FSA agent. Be patient with them because they are still learning what this program looks like in the mountains. We hope to have more answers in this as time goes on, and as we have more clarification, we'll certainly send it out and share it with folks. But both FSA office and your NRCS office, Natural Resource Conservation Service, they historically have been the organization that has cost share funding for landowners that want to be good stewards and active in their forest. So I would recommend reaching out to both of those agencies for additional information.
Thank you, Lang. And we are getting lots of questions, probably more than we're going to be able to answer in this hour, but we're going to try. And we are going to have a follow-up email to all the participants that Emma's going to send, that's going to have kind of the links, a summary of information that if you heard somebody mention something but weren't able to write down what the web address is, we will follow up with you about that. And we're continuing to get questions. And Sarah, I guess this is directed for you, related to salvage timber. Beyond the creation of access roads, what considerations are there? We had a question in the Q&A about isn't removal of timber just going to cause more harm and damage than leaving it there? So maybe a little bit more on salvage timber.
I'll say first, I have to do my job as stewardship director. If you're a conservation easement landowner, please call us first. Before you decide to do any sort of timber harvest. Likely your easement has some requirements that need to be followed. So if that is something you want to discuss, please reach out to me or the lead steward for your property. So I've given my public service announcement on that. So thank you for bearing with me. You know, we're sort of analyzing this too, and where this falls for us is regarding timber management. We also have massive landslides on SAHC properties. If those don't pose any sort of risk to infrastructure, so roads, neighboring properties, maybe there are structures, whatever sort of infrastructure may be in place, we're probably going to leave it in place at this point. So we're really addressing this on a case-by-case basis. So if we do have issues that are impacting the infrastructure, then those are sort of ranking higher for us to address. And, you know, I think Lang and Michael might have more to say about whether folks just want to leave it and what the benefits of leaving it. I bet Liz also has some thoughts on wildlife benefits to just letting it decompose in place. So I'll give other folks a chance to weigh in.
I'll take a quick shot and then hand it over to Lang, but it really depends on the landowner's objectives. I mean, really, when we talk about forest management plans and we talk about working with landowners, what does the landowner expect out of that forest and what do they want out of it? And that's what forestry is about, is trying to manage that land to meet your objectives. Big picture wise, again, thinking about it, what do you want that forest to be in the future? So with a lot of oaks coming down, we have been struggling as land managers for many years in regenerating oaks. It's documented that oaks are in the decline across the Southern Appalachians. They are not regenerating. We have been researching, developing recommendations to help develop oak regeneration for many years. And one of the standards for that is gap creation in the overstory, getting the right amount of light to the forest floor. Well, now we have a historic event that has created a lot of gap creation. So potentially we have a lot of area that is primed for oak regeneration, which is good. That's a silver lining of all this when we're talking about trying to manage the forest and trying to develop oaks for the future. But there's a concern with that. We have not been regenerating oaks for many, many years because of poplar and maple. They come in and take over the sites. So if we've got the right light, we've got the right conditions for oak, then if that's what we want as land managers or as a landowner, then we need to control the maple and poplar. So can we get into those woods to go in there and control the maple and poplar regeneration to promote the oak? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. Goes back to what Lang said earlier. It all depends on the situation. There's varying degrees of the situations out there across the landscape. So there's certain areas where it makes sense. There's probably certain areas where it makes sense to leave it. But it's a huge discussion. It's something we're kind of trying to wrap our head around now with a lot of the different land management agencies.
One thing I'll add, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, is the absence of markets make it really hard to do active forest management that is going to remove material. That when we had vibrant mills and the paper mill that was buying a lot of this low value material, it incentivized landowners to be able to do this work. And so in the absence of a logger or someone coming to pay a landowner so they will be able to offset the cost of this, it's going to be hard to remove this material without it just being a straight up cost to the landowner. So I saw some questions around, could we use this for biochar or other firewood, mulch? The short answer is yes, we can, if we can develop more vibrant markets for them. Someone that is already cutting firewood could certainly take wood and continue to do that. Same with mulch. Biochar is a little trickier in that there is not an active, vibrant market that is ready to buy, asking for more biochar. Are there great uses that would benefit the region? Absolutely, but it's a little bit of a chicken egg situation. Do you create a bunch of biochar and hope you find someone to buy it? Or do you find someone who's going to come in and invest in the region and then help produce biochar using a lot of this material that needs to come out of the forest? The U.S. Forest Service and the Southern Research Station, they have a firebox for biochar, and they are looking into what kind of yield do you get out of creating biochar and how much could be created, and is this a viable market? So folks are looking into it right now, but in the absence of those markets, it's going to be much harder to incentivize landowners to get this wood out of the forest.
And then I'll just add from a wildlife perspective and piggyback off of Michael, depending on, folks' objectives on their land, of course, wildlife and their habitats and oak trees are incredibly important for that in our forest systems. The acorns themselves, but then they're completely tied to insect biodiversity that's evolved through time. And so oak trees, beyond the structure and the acorns they produce, have these other intricacies that really our biodiversity depends on. So promoting those is important. And I'll say, again, as a forest wildlife perspective, down trees that are decomposing provide, food and shelter for a diversity of wildlife, as these snags that are up in the air. But I'll say from my own experience currently, I'm constantly asking myself, based on the wall of downed trees in my backyard in Woodfin, like, how is that wildlife habitat, right? It almost provides a barrier there. So here and there, those things are great. How these stacks of trees on top of trees provide habitat, or what happens there, will have to be seen. I'm sure in some places things can be denning up in there, but overall decomposition rates and things like that, I have no idea, but it's a curiosity to me for sure.
We had a question about the new river in Ashe County and if anybody had any specific knowledge about debris removal or anything in that vicinity, but sorry, I just don't think we have a specific answer on that. And we continue to get questions about forest management plans and if there's a minimum number of acres that you have to have for it to be considered a forest that you'd get a forest management plan for.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Short answer is no. I mean, we've done management plans for a couple acres up to several thousand acres. There is a present use value forest management program through your tax office to get a reduced tax rate on your forest land, but that does require 20 acres or more. So just for a forest management plan, we've done that for various sizes of forest from the urban setting on out. But there are different programs that require different amount of acres for their programs.
Thanks, Michael. We had a question about retiring forest roads to prevent risk of future landslides. It seems like maybe more landslides are happening sort of below a road installation. And
I will say, I mean, that was a surprising aspect of all of this. I mean, I believe the last number I saw, there's been mapped up to upwards of 2,300 landslides across the affected area. I know several of the counties have been working with landslide mapping over the last few years. I think there's still a few counties that don't have that. So I think that's one of those key pieces that we probably need to look at as we move forward. Are these properties that we're working with, or these landowners, are their properties in high hazard landslide areas? I think that's something we'll probably be paying a little bit more attention to than we have in years past. The forest road aspect, again, it really just depends, as Lang said earlier. Many cases, I like forest roads to be open because they're potential fire breaks. If there's a wildfire in that area, it provides access, easier access than trying to go through the woods. So again, it just really depends on that landowner's objectives and what they have going on their property.
And I would also add, the forestry is a big exercise in adaptive management. Everything that happens in your actions unfold, the results of your actions unfold over years or decades. And so there's a need to go in and assess the things that you have done, monitor them, and adjust as needed. And I think we are seeing lots of past action over the past century of how we have used our natural resources, that we are now seeing the impacts. And high grading is a great example. And I think it's generally accepted now that we shouldn't be doing that, and we don't want to do that. And I feel like the question about roads and landslides, now landslides are going to be much more front and center than they have been in the past. And hopefully there'll be a lot of adaptation that is going to happen as a result of Helene.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a geologist, so there's not much I can say about landslides except for that we are seeing them across our landscape on conservation easements and SAHC held lands. We are coordinating with the North Carolina Geological Survey to help complement their mapping, because as Michael reported, there's over 2,000, but we're seeing quite a few that are not incorporated into the USGS's accounting of those landslides. So we hope to help paint a more comprehensive picture of where landslides are occurring. Obviously, when you have that much rainfall come down in a short period of time, the risk of landslide or slope failure increases exponentially. And I'm hopeful out of this event that our partners at NC Geological Survey will have some educational materials that they can share. We are trying to decide how to stabilize some of those landslides, potentially relying on geotechnical engineers. Like we have some of the same questions that you all have, but I am hopeful that more of that information is going to come out since landslides are so front and center right now.
Thanks, Sarah. And there was a question in the chat about to define high grading, that folks didn't know what that is. If they thought maybe it was cutting the trees at high elevation, but it's different from that.
Simple definition is taking the best and leaving the rest. And it's just similar to think about it in terms of the ocean. If you did nothing but take the most vibrant, strongest, genetically strong species away, then what you are leaving those that are not as developed over time, you're going to degrade the overall forest health. And so, yeah, that's a short way of saying high grading.
Thanks, Lang. And we are continuing to get lots of questions in. So as we run short on time, we'll just try to throw as many of these out to you all as we can. A question about assistance for debris removal. I guess tall piles of wood debris, oil barrels, trash, and cars on properties. I think maybe this was in Yancey County, and wondering if there's programs for assistance.
I think some of this is on a county by county basis. The municipalities are often coordinating this. Here in Buncombe County, there is a program. I don't know about Yancey County. We can look into that and provide that as a follow-up resource. I don't know if DOT, maybe along, DOT maintained roads, that that also might be happening, but private lands is a little bit different. And I don't know if Michael or Lang have anything to add about that.
Yeah, I would say if it's along the roads, state maintained roads, work or contact your local emergency management office. They've been working with FEMA to do debris removal along roads, both woody debris as well as people's home debris that got flooded or damaged, or stuff that they put out on the side of the road. I know several counties around that are doing that. I do not know specifically for Yancey County if they're doing that or not.
And in fairness, I think the question may have been aimed at asking if Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy has capacity to help with that or organize programs. And the reality is we're likely don't have the capacity to help landowners with debris removal. Just continuing on with the questions, there was a question about carbon sequestration programs and opportunities, and whether Helene has negatively impacted that viability of that.
That's a great question. And the carbon sequestration market, there's some variety in there depending on who the group is that is in charge of setting the standard. So what activities are allowed from a stewardship and management perspective in those acres that are enrolled in a market. If there are things that you need to do to your forest that are prohibited by that market, then it will certainly impact a landowner's ability to be in that market. I think that there is probably going to be opportunity for landowners to use carbon markets as in their toolbox of incentives of getting revenue. We often talk about, we are kind of in this restoration period of the natural resources of our region, even before Helene. We think about how our resources have been used over the past 100+ years, and our forests, quite frankly, are a little tired. And we just need to reinvest in them in the form of invasive species control, in the form of oak regeneration and prescribed fire, and do some of these things that might not be generating revenue from a forest product standpoint, but are needed if we want this resource to stay healthy and viable to the region into the future. And I think carbon markets are a great example. And again, I would reach out to the folks that are actively doing those markets and ask that same question, because it's going to depend on what they require to be a part of that market.
Thank you, Lang. We had a question about river cane and impact on river cane, and if there's any funding or organizations working on propagating river cane and if any of you have insight on that. We heard some anecdotal evidence on a property that it appeared that the river cane stand was still intact and okay. Property we've been looking at for conservation potential, but that's just anecdotal rather than scientific. We also had a question about links to summaries of the impact of Helene's damage on forests and streams, and if there's any kind of comprehensive report on that. I think it's probably too early, but a map tool showing areas of landslides, tree falls, any images. So to the extent that we have access to any communication tools like that, I think we can try to share them in the follow-up email after this webinar. But if any of you want to comment on any of that.
Well, Michael, I think the Forest Service or NC Forest Service just put out a pretty comprehensive report on the damages to forests. I know U.S. Forest Service is also working on that, and there are several like web viewers out there on landslides and winds and things like that that we can sort of lump into a follow-up email.
Yes, that's correct, Sarah. Also, we're working on with the U.S. Forest Service to do some satellite imagery, GIS outside my realm of expertise work to show where the highest levels of disturbance in the canopy, more of a well, my mind just went blank on the process, but we are looking to because that first survey we did was very coarse. It was very old school. We got up in an airplane. We did a grid. We took visual observations and developed it out that way. Now we're getting satellite imagery and vegetative change data to actually look and see where, based on the vegetation, the highest areas of disturbance are. So that stuff should be coming out soon.
And to Michael's point, that is a very coarse scale of what has been coming out. And like a lot of forestry, getting boots on the ground in these areas is going to be great to have the products like what the Forest Service is putting out in order to help inform where to go and how to look at that finer scale to really start to see impacts.
Yeah, my hope there is as we can use that satellite data and we can see where the worst impacts are to private landowners and to communities and homeowners, we can focus our efforts from a fuel mitigation and wildfire control standpoint to overlay that data with where historically we have a lot of wildfires. And then there we go and we work in those communities that are around those higher risk areas long term. But we'll see how that goes.
Thanks, Michael. And I do see some links popping up in the chat that are for some of the mapping tools and information. And if those are not available, if not everybody on the webinar can see those, we will follow up with an email that has those links in it so you can check them out afterwards. I see that we've gone for 60 minutes and folks maybe have some wrap-up comments. I do want to invite everybody to come to our webinar next Wednesday, which is going to focus a little bit more on the public lands impacts and of Helene and recovery from that. But we do appreciate everybody joining us for this webinar and would just like to invite if any of you panelists have something you want to share that maybe you didn't get a chance to focus on or mention, this would be the time to do that.
I guess the only thing I'd add is, I mean, we're very early in this process. Some hurricanes we've dealt with over the years takes a few weeks to recover, a few months to recover. This is going to be a long-term recovery effort. I'm talking when we're talking about the forests and the woodlands, I mean, 10, 20 years or better of recovery efforts trying to see where we go in the future, because the down trees, the damage is going to be there. So we're still learning, we're still adapting, trying to figure out the best way to go. And we are working as land managers and also public land managers. We're working with our counterparts with the U.S. Forest Service, North Carolina Wildlife Commission, and state parks on how to best move forward and what some of the objectives and priorities should be.
Thank you, Michael.
I'll add, for those landowners that are here that are, I mean, you wouldn't be here if you weren't concerned. Keep talking to your neighbors. I'm sure a lot of folks have engaged with neighbors and people in their community that they have either not spoken with in a long time or didn't know that they've had this opportunity now to get to know them. A lot of the issues that we've discussed today, no property boundary. And if your landowner, if your neighbor is not addressing something, then it could impact you. So we have had a couple of opportunities where communities have reached out about planning for a community and thinking about the things, the values people share and what can be done, what adds, what's scalable in terms of if landowners are pitching in together, how much more are we able to accomplish rather than on an individual basis. So hopefully you can continue that goodwill and look for solutions with your neighbors. Particularly those that may have been active in their forest prior to the storm, because they have a lot of just great information of actual experience of how they've navigated forest stewardship, where some of these resources are. And so I would encourage you to continue those. And if you don't mind, Carl, I've got a plug for those who want more information. On December 18th at Highland Brewing, EcoForesters, along with the Southern Research Station and the Society of American Foresters, and with generosity from Weyerhaeuser, are going to be putting on an event that is going to have about 21 organizations that are going to be there tabling. These are agencies, these are nonprofits, these are forestry professionals that are going to be able to spend time with individuals and answer your questions about your in particular property or concern. It starts at 4 to give people the opportunity to table. At 6, we're going to have a discussion a little bit like what we're having right now. We're going to have someone with the North Carolina Forest Service involved with prescribed fire, someone from the Southern Research Station, someone from the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, a local forestry group. And we are going to have audience questions and hopefully have a back and forth, a lot of what you've seen today that are going to help you get more answers as we work towards finding some solutions to these really hard problems. But if you'd like to come, I think they're going to send a link out. We have on our website event page, you can register, you can ask your questions prior to the event as well. And we're looking forward to a vibrant discussion.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone for being here and being engaged, and SAHC for giving us this opportunity to start kind of wrap our heads around this and get the information out to folks.
And I think the last thing that I want to say in commenting on maybe some of the things that popped up in the chat, I do think that there is a willingness on behalf of at least the commissioners and some of the representatives I've spoken to continue to fund recovery efforts. I'm hopeful that state and federal funds will be appropriated to help with recovery, particularly or including stream restoration and maybe even more forest management. I can't predict whether that's true, but I do think that this is sort of a nonpartisan issue that everyone really cares about and wants to see us all move forward as successfully as possible. And like Liz said, just thank you for being here. I'm happy if folks want to reach out to me independently about questions regarding SHC. I'm happy to answer those, although I know Emma's going to help us put together a really thorough document. So thanks for being here and appreciate all of your questions. This has been a really challenging time for everyone, but I think we are going to learn quite a bit on the other side.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you, Michael, Lang, Liz, and Sarah for participating in this panel and sharing your knowledge. And thanks to everybody who is watching the webinar. We do greatly appreciate it. Check out our webinar next Wednesday on approaching recovery on public lands. And I do think that since a recurring theme is that this is evolving knowledge as time passes, we'd like to reconvene this panel maybe in the spring after we've had some time to pass to again share new information. And we'll be at the event out at Highland Brewing next week and want to encourage anybody who can to participate in that as well. So thanks so much. And I think this wraps up the webinar.